The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in September of 1878, and Thomas Sullivan thought nothing of hiring a housekeeper sight unseen until the woman stepped off the stagecoach in Hot Springs, New Mexico territory, looking like she might bolt at the slightest sound. Thomas had been managing his cattle ranch alone for 3 years since his mother passed, and the house had fallen into a state of disrepair that embarrassed him whenever anyone stopped by. Dust coated every surface, dishes piled in the basin, and his clothes hung wherever he dropped them after long days working the herd. At 32 years old, he figured it was time to get some help before the place became completely unlivable. The advertisement he placed in the Santa Fe newspaper had been simple: ranch seeking housekeeper, room and board plus wages, quiet location, inquire at Sullivan Ranch, Hot Springs. He had received only one response, a brief letter written in elegant script stating that a Miss Sarah Norton would arrive on the 15th of September and requested no further correspondence beforehand. Now she stood in the dusty main street of Hot Springs, clutching a single worn carpetbag, her dark hair pulled back severely from a pale face that might have been pretty if not for the haunted look in her green eyes. She wore a plain gray dress that had seen better days, and despite the heat, she kept a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Thomas approached slowly, removing his hat. "Miss Norton, I am Thomas Sullivan." She flinched at his voice, then seemed to collect herself. "Mr. Sullivan, yes. Thank you for meeting me." Her voice was soft, cultured, not what he expected from someone answering an advertisement for ranch work. She spoke like someone educated, maybe even wealthy once. Thomas felt suddenly self-conscious about his dusty clothes and the stubble on his jaw. "I have a wagon just there," he said, gesturing down the street. "It is about an hour's ride to the ranch." She nodded without meeting his eyes and followed him to where his horse and wagon waited. Thomas helped her up onto the bench seat, noting how she trembled at his touch, how she arranged herself as far from him as possible once seated. They rode in silence for the first 20 minutes, the wagon wheels creaking over the rutted road that led out of town and into the open country. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional twisted juniper tree. Mountains rose in the distance, purple against the bright blue sky. "Have you done housekeeping work before?" Thomas finally asked, needing to break the uncomfortable quiet. "Some," Sarah replied, still not looking at him. "I am a capable cook and I know how to maintain a home properly." "The place is not much to look at," Thomas admitted. "It is just me, so I have let things go. My mother used to keep everything running smoothly, but after she died, I focused on the cattle and let the house fall apart." "I am sure it will be fine," Sarah said quietly. Thomas studied her profile as he drove, noting the tension in her jaw, the way her hands gripped her carpetbag like it might be torn away at any moment. She was running from something, that much was obvious. But plenty of people came west to escape their pasts, and Thomas figured it was not his business to pry unless it affected his property or his life. The ranch appeared over a rise, a modest adobe house with a sagging porch, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. The land stretched for hundreds of acres in all directions, good grazing country that Thomas had worked hard to maintain. His herd numbered about 200 head now, enough to make a decent living if he could keep them healthy and get them to market each year. "The house has 3 bedrooms," Thomas explained as he pulled the wagon up to the front. "You can have the one on the east side. It gets good morning light. There is a kitchen, a main room, and a washroom out back. Nothing fancy, but it is solid." Sarah climbed down from the wagon before he could help her and stood looking at the house with an expression he could not read. Relief, maybe, mixed with something else. Fear, perhaps. "Would you like to see your room?" Thomas asked. "Yes, thank you." He carried her carpetbag inside, very aware of how shabby everything looked. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through dirty windows. The furniture was old and worn, the floors needed sweeping, and he had left his breakfast dishes on the table that morning. "I apologize for the mess," Thomas said, feeling his face grow warm. "That is why I need help." "It is no matter," Sarah replied. "I will have it sorted out soon enough." He showed her to the bedroom, a simple space with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a small window overlooking the eastern pastures. Someone, probably his mother years ago, had hung faded curtains that moved gently in the breeze. "I will leave you to settle in," Thomas said. "Take today to rest from your journey. We can discuss your duties and wages tomorrow." Sarah turned to face him for the first time since they arrived, and he saw genuine gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. You are very kind." He nodded and left her alone, heading outside to tend to the horses and give her space. As he worked, he found himself wondering about her story. She was educated, well-mannered, clearly not accustomed to hard labor. Yet here she was, traveling alone to work as a housekeeper for a stranger in the middle of nowhere. Something had driven her here, something serious enough that she was willing to leave whatever life she had before. That evening, Thomas made his usual simple supper of beans and cornbread, expecting to eat alone. But Sarah emerged from her room just as he was sitting down, her hair still pulled back but her shawl removed now, revealing a slender frame and graceful movements. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the table. "Of course. Would you like some supper? It is not much." "That would be nice, thank you." They ate together in awkward silence, the scrape of spoons against tin plates the only sound. Thomas kept sneaking glances at her, noticing details he had missed before. She was younger than he initially thought, probably mid-20s. Her hands, though pale and delicate, showed signs of recent hard work, calluses forming on her palms. And there was a fading bruise on her wrist, just visible below her sleeve cuff. "The food is good," Sarah said quietly. "Simple but well prepared." "I have had years of practice making do," Thomas replied. "But I am looking forward to some proper cooking again. My mother used to make amazing meals. I never learned her skills." "What did she pass from, if I may ask?" "Fever. It came on sudden and took her within a week. The doctor from town could not do anything." "I am sorry. That must have been very difficult." Thomas nodded, appreciating her sympathy. "It was. She was all the family I had left. My father died when I was young and I never had siblings." "So you run this entire ranch alone?" "I have 2 ranch hands who come in during busy seasons, but mostly yes, it is just me. The herd is not so large that I cannot manage it." Sarah fell silent again, pushing beans around her plate. Thomas sensed she had more questions but was too cautious to ask them. After they finished eating, she stood and began clearing the dishes without being asked. "You do not have to start working tonight," Thomas said. "You should rest." "I would rather keep busy," Sarah replied, and something in her tone made him not argue further. He left her to the washing up and went outside to smoke his pipe on the porch, watching the sun set over the western mountains in brilliant shades of orange and red. The evening air was cooling rapidly, the way it always did in the high desert. Cattle lowed in the distance, a peaceful sound he had grown to love over the years. Through the window, he could see Sarah moving around the kitchen, her movements efficient and practiced despite her claim of only some housekeeping experience. She was a mystery, this quiet woman who had appeared in his life. But Thomas had learned long ago not to push for answers people were not ready to give. The West was full of secrets, and most were better left buried. The next morning, Thomas woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, luxuries he rarely bothered with anymore. He dressed quickly and found Sarah already up, the kitchen transformed. She had cleaned everything, the surfaces now gleaming, the dishes put away, even the floor swept clean. "Good morning," she said, sliding eggs onto a plate for him. "I hope I did not wake you." "No, I am usually up with the sun anyway. This is wonderful, thank you." They ate breakfast together, and Thomas explained her duties would include cooking, cleaning, laundry, and basic household maintenance. The wages he offered were fair, perhaps even generous, and included her room and board. Sarah accepted without negotiation, which made him wonder again about her circumstances. "I will need to go into town once a week for supplies," Thomas said. "You are welcome to come along if you wish, or stay here if you prefer." Something flickered across her face, fear perhaps. "I think I would prefer to stay here if that is acceptable. Of course, whatever you are comfortable with." Over the following days, Sarah settled into her role with remarkable efficiency. The house underwent a complete transformation. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, aired out musty rooms, and reorganized everything with a system that made sense. The meals improved dramatically. She cooked hearty stews, fresh bread, even desserts that reminded Thomas of his childhood. Laundry appeared clean and pressed. The whole place began to feel like a home again, but Sarah herself remained a mystery. She spoke little unless spoken to, never mentioned her past, and seemed to jump at every unexpected sound. Thomas noticed she always positioned herself near exits, that she watched the road to town constantly, that she froze whenever hoofbeats approached. She was clearly terrified of something or someone finding her. 2 weeks after her arrival, Thomas returned from checking fence lines to find Sarah standing at the window, her face pale, staring at a rider approaching in the distance. Her hands were shaking. "Sarah, what is wrong?" "I do not know them," she said quickly. "I am sure it is nothing," but the fear in her voice told a different story. Thomas went to the door, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle he kept mounted by the entrance. The rider turned out to be Pete Martinez, one of his occasional ranch hands, just stopping by to check if Thomas needed help with the upcoming cattle drive. Sarah visibly relaxed when she realized the visitor posed no threat, but the incident stayed with Thomas. That evening, after Pete had left and they had finished supper, he decided it was time to address the situation directly. "Sarah, I want you to know that you are safe here," he said carefully, "but I cannot help you if I do not know what you are running from." She looked up at him, her green eyes wide with panic. "I am not running from anything." "You are a terrible liar," Thomas said gently. "You barely sleep. You watch the road constantly. You flinch at shadows. Something has you terrified, and I think I deserve to know what might be coming to my property." Sarah stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. For a long moment she said nothing, just stared out the window at the darkening sky. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "His name is Richard Thornton. He is a railroad magnate in Chicago, very powerful, very wealthy, very dangerous. I was engaged to marry him." Thomas waited, letting her tell the story at her own pace. "My father was a banker," Sarah continued. "He did business with Mr. Thornton, and when my father died, he left debts. Thornton offered to forgive them if I would marry him. My mother was desperate. She pushed me to accept." Sarah's voice grew harder. "I did not want to, but I felt I had no choice. Thornton seemed charming at first, but once we were engaged, he changed. He became controlling, possessive. He wanted to know where I was every moment. He chose my clothes, my activities, my friends. When I tried to end the engagement, he threatened my mother, said he would ruin her completely if I did not comply." "So you ran," Thomas said. Sarah nodded. 2 months ago, I took what little money I had saved and left in the middle of the night. I traveled west, changing trains multiple times using false names. When I saw your advertisement, I thought this would be far enough, remote enough that he would never find me. But Mr. Thornton is not a man who accepts defeat. He has investigators, contacts everywhere. If he is still looking for me, and I believe he is, eventually someone might trace my path here. Thomas absorbed this information, understanding now the depth of her fear. A powerful man with unlimited resources and a bruised ego would indeed be dangerous. How far would he go to get you back? I do not know, Sarah admitted, but I saw his temper. Before I left, he struck me when I suggested postponing the wedding. That was when I knew I had to escape, no matter the cost. The bruise Thomas had noticed on her wrist suddenly made terrible sense. He felt anger rising in his chest, not at Sarah, but at this Thornton character who thought he could own another person through threats and violence. "You will stay here as long as you need," Thomas said firmly. "If anyone comes looking for you, they will have to deal with me first." Sarah turned to face him, tears glistening in her eyes. "Why would you risk that? You barely know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," Thomas replied simply, "and because no one deserves to be hunted like an animal for wanting their freedom." Something shifted between them in that moment, a wall coming down. Sarah wiped her eyes and gave him a small, genuine smile, the first he had seen from her. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. You are a good man." "Call me Thomas," he said. "Mr. Sullivan was my father." "Thomas," she repeated, and he liked the way his name sounded in her voice. The days turned into weeks, and autumn settled over the New Mexico territory in earnest. The air grew crisper, the nights longer. Thomas prepared for the cattle drive that would take his herd to market before winter set in. Sarah continued her work with quiet efficiency, but slowly, gradually, she began to relax. Her smiles came more frequently. She started conversations instead of just responding to them. She laughed at Thomas's stories about ranch mishaps and shared small details about her own past, carefully edited to avoid painful memories. Thomas found himself looking forward to returning to the house each evening, not just for the hot meals and clean clothes, but for Sarah's company. She was intelligent and well-read, able to discuss books and current events with an insight that impressed him. She had a dry sense of humor that emerged when she felt comfortable. And despite everything she had been through, she possessed a kindness and gentleness that drew him to her. He tried not to examine his growing feelings too closely. Sarah was his employee, a woman in a vulnerable position, running from a dangerous situation. The last thing she needed was another man making demands on her. So Thomas kept his distance, maintained proper boundaries, even as he found himself noticing how the lamplight caught in her hair, how her eyes crinkled when she smiled, how her presence made his lonely house feel like a real home. One evening in late October, Thomas returned from town with supplies and mail to find Sarah baking pies from apples he had brought from the general store. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and sugar, and she had flour dusted on her cheek. "Any news in town?" she asked as he set down the sacks. "The usual gossip," Thomas replied, then hesitated. "Actually, Pete mentioned something strange. He said a fancy-dressed man came through last week asking questions about newcomers to the area. Pete did not think much of it at the time, but I wonder." Sarah's face went pale. "What did this man look like?" Pete said he wore an expensive suit, had dark hair and a mustache, spoke like he was from back east. He was asking at the hotel, the general store, anywhere people might have seen someone new. "That could be one of Thornton's investigators," Sarah said, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "They often dress well to blend in with respectable society while gathering information. Thomas felt protective instincts surge through him. "Did Pete mention you?" "I do not know. He saw me once when he was here. If this man asked the right questions." "Then we need to be careful," Thomas said. "But remember, you are using a different name here than you did on your journey west, correct?" Sarah nodded. "I have been Sarah Norton since Kansas. Before that, I used different names." "Good. And Hot Springs is small enough that strangers stand out. If anyone comes asking about you specifically, word will reach us quickly." Despite his reassurances, Thomas saw the fear return to Sarah's eyes, the tension settling back into her shoulders. That night, he made sure his rifle was loaded and kept it closer at hand. He also began thinking about what they would do if Thornton's men did track Sarah here. Running was always an option, but Thomas hated the idea of her spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. The incident made Thomas realize something else. He cared about Sarah more than he wanted to admit. The thought of her being dragged back to Chicago, forced into a marriage with a violent man, filled him with a fierce protectiveness that went beyond simple hospitality or even friendship. Somewhere along the way, over shared meals and quiet conversations and the comfortable routine of living under the same roof, he had fallen for her. It was a dangerous realization. Sarah needed safety and stability, not romantic complications. Yet Thomas could not deny what he felt. He found himself watching her more often, memorizing the way she moved, the sound of her voice, the rare gift of her laughter. He looked for excuses to be near her, to talk with her, to see her smile. One afternoon, when he came in for lunch, he found her struggling to move a heavy pot from the stove. Without thinking, he stepped behind her to help, his arms reaching around her to grip the handles. For a moment they stood pressed close together, and Thomas felt her breath catch, felt her lean back slightly against him. Time seemed to stop. Then Sarah stepped away quickly, her cheeks flushed. "Thank you," she murmured, not meeting his eyes. "Any time," Thomas replied, his own heart racing. After that, the air between them felt charged with something unspoken. Thomas caught her watching him sometimes when she thought he was not looking. Their hands brushed when passing dishes at dinner. Their conversations grew longer, stretching late into the evenings. They sat closer together when reviewing supply lists or discussing ranch matters. November arrived with cold winds and the first hints of winter. Thomas took his herd to market with Pete and another hand, leaving Sarah alone at the ranch for 5 days. He hated leaving her, worried constantly about her safety, but the cattle had to be sold before the weather turned worse. The drive went smoothly, and Thomas got good prices for his stock. He returned home with a strong box full of money and gifts for Sarah, practical things like fabric for new dresses and books he thought she might enjoy. His heart lifted when he saw lamplight in the windows of the house, smoke rising from the chimney. Sarah met him at the door, and the relief on her face was unmistakable. "You are back. I was starting to worry." "Just took a bit longer than expected," Thomas said, suddenly shy about the packages he carried. "I brought you some things." Her eyes widened when he showed her the fabric and books. "Thomas, you did not have to do this. I know. I wanted to." Sarah looked up at him, and something passed between them, a recognition of feelings neither had voiced. For a moment, Thomas thought she might say something, might acknowledge what was growing between them. But instead, she just smiled and thanked him softly. They fell back into their routine, but with a new awareness. Thomas found himself thinking about the future, about what it might be like to have Sarah as more than just his housekeeper. He imagined her as his wife, imagined children running through the house, imagined growing old together on this land he loved. But he held back from saying anything, unsure if she could feel the same way, if she was ready for any kind of relationship after what she had escaped. December brought snow to the high country, and the ranch settled into winter patterns. Thomas spent more time indoors, repairing tack and equipment, planning for spring. He and Sarah spent long evenings by the fire, reading or talking, the intimacy of the shared space bringing them closer together. One night, about 3 months after Sarah had arrived, they sat together on the old sofa in the main room, a book of poetry open between them. Thomas had been reading aloud, something he had started doing on these cold nights because Sarah seemed to enjoy it. He finished a particularly romantic poem and looked up to find her watching him with an expression that made his breath catch. "Sarah," he said softly. "Yes. I need to tell you something, and I want you to know you can say no. Nothing will change if you do. You will always have a place here, always be safe, no matter what." Her eyes widened slightly. "What is it?" Thomas set the book aside and turned to face her fully. "I have developed feelings for you, feelings that go beyond employer and employee, beyond even friendship. I think about you constantly. I care about your happiness, your safety, your future. I find myself imagining what it would be like if you stayed here not as my housekeeper but as my wife." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. "I know you have been through something terrible," Thomas continued quickly. "I know you might not be ready for any of this, but I needed you to know how I feel. You have brought life back to this place, Sarah. You have brought life back to me." For a long moment, Sarah said nothing, just looked at him with those expressive green eyes. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. "Thomas, I am afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of what I feel for you because it is so different from anything I have known before." Richard Thornton was all control and possession, but you are kind and patient and respectful. You have given me safety and asked for nothing in return. I did not know men like you existed. "I am nothing special," Thomas said. "Just a simple rancher trying to make a life out here." "You are everything," Sarah replied, her voice breaking. "You are everything I did not know I was searching for. But Thomas, I come with danger attached to me. Thornton may still be looking. He may find me eventually. I could not bear it if you were hurt because of me." "Let me worry about that," Thomas said firmly. "I can handle whatever comes. The question is, do you want this? Do you want me the way I want you?" Sarah leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "Yes, God help me, yes. I think I started falling for you the moment you offered me kindness without conditions. I kept telling myself it was impossible, that I should not let myself feel this way, but I do. I love you, Thomas Sullivan." The words released something in both of them. Thomas cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her, a soft, tentative kiss that quickly deepened as Sarah responded. It was nothing like the forceful, possessive kisses Thornton had demanded. This was mutual, tender, full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Thomas saw joy mixed with tears on Sarah's face. "Marry me," he said. "Not because of debts or obligations or anything except that I love you and want to spend my life with you." "Yes," Sarah breathed. "Yes, I will marry you." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about the future they would build together. Thomas wanted to marry as soon as possible, partly because he loved her and partly because, as his wife, Sarah would have more legal protection if Thornton ever did track her down. They decided to go into town after Christmas and speak to the circuit judge about a marriage license. The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness neither had thought possible. Thomas felt like a young man again, energized by love and hope. Sarah bloomed like a flower in sunshine, her smiles frequent now, her laughter ringing through the house. They stole kisses in the kitchen, held hands by the fire, talked long into the night about everything and nothing. On Christmas Eve, as they decorated the house with pine branches and ribbons Sarah had fashioned, Thomas pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "This is the best Christmas I have had in years," he murmured. "Mine too," Sarah replied, wrapping her arms around his waist. "I feel like I can finally breathe again, like I can finally believe in a future." The next morning, they exchanged simple gifts. Thomas gave Sarah a beautiful shawl he had ordered from the general store, soft wool dyed in shades of blue and green. She gave him a shirt she had sewn herself, every stitch perfect, made from fabric she had purchased with her own wages. "It is perfect," Thomas said, genuinely touched. "You did not have to spend your money on me." "I wanted to," Sarah replied. "You have given me so much." The day after Christmas, they hitched up the wagon and headed into Hot Springs to see about the marriage license. The town was quiet, most people still celebrating the holiday with family. Thomas helped Sarah down from the wagon and offered his arm, proud to have her by his side. They found the judge's office closed for the holiday, but the hotel clerk told them Judge Morrison would be back the next day. Thomas decided they should stay in town overnight rather than make the long trip twice. He got them separate rooms at the hotel, maintaining propriety even though every part of him wanted to keep Sarah close. That evening they had dinner in the hotel restaurant, a rare treat. Sarah wore her best dress, and Thomas had cleaned up and shaved. They must have looked like any other courting couple, happy and in love, planning their future together. "I want to show you something after dinner," Thomas said as they finished their meal. "If you are not too tired, I would like that." He led her outside and down the main street to where a small church stood at the edge of town. Lamplight glowed from inside, and when they entered, they found it empty except for candles burning on the altar. "I thought you might like to see where we will be married," Thomas said softly. "I spoke to the minister before. He is willing to perform the ceremony once we have the license." Sarah walked down the aisle slowly, taking in the simple beauty of the space. When she reached the altar, she turned to face Thomas, her eyes shining with tears. "It is perfect," she said. "Simple and honest, just like you." Thomas joined her at the altar and took both her hands in his. "I want you to know something, Sarah. When I marry you, it is forever. I will protect you, care for you, and love you for the rest of my life. You will never have to be afraid again." "I believe you," Sarah whispered. "For the first time in so long, I actually believe in tomorrow." They stood there together in the quiet church, making private vows to each other before they would make public ones. Thomas kissed her gently, reverently, in the space where they would soon be joined together. The spell was broken by the sound of the church door opening behind them. They turned to see a man silhouetted in the doorway, a man in an expensive suit who radiated authority and barely contained anger. Sarah's hand tightened on Thomas's arm, her whole body going rigid. "Richard," she breathed. Thornton stepped into the lamplight, and Thomas got his first look at the man who had terrorized Sarah. He was perhaps 40 years old, handsome in a cold way, with dark hair and a perfectly groomed mustache. Everything about him screamed money and power, from his tailored clothes to the gold watch chain across his vest. "Sarah, my dear," Thornton said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "You have led me on quite a chase." Thomas moved slightly in front of Sarah, his hand instinctively moving toward his hip before remembering he had left his gun at the hotel. "I think you should leave," he said firmly. Thornton's eyes flicked to Thomas dismissively before returning to Sarah. "And who might this be?" "Another unfortunate man you have deceived with your charms." "She has not deceived anyone," Thomas replied, keeping his voice level despite the anger building inside him. "Now leave before I make you leave." "Brave words from a cowboy," Thornton said with a cold laugh. "Do you have any idea who I am? What I could do to you?" "I know who you are," Thomas said. "And I do not care. Sarah is under my protection now. She is going to be my wife. Whatever claim you think you had on her is finished. Something dangerous flashed in Thornton's eyes. My claim. She is my fiancée. We have a legal contract. Her mother signed papers. A contract signed under duress is not legal, Sarah said, finding her voice despite the fear Thomas could feel radiating from her. And I never agreed to it willingly. You threatened my mother. You threatened me. I offered you everything, Thornton snarled, his smooth facade cracking. Wealth, position, a life most women would kill for, and you ran away like an ungrateful child. You offered me a prison, Sarah shot back, some of her old spirit emerging. You struck me, Richard. You tried to control every aspect of my life. That is not love, that is ownership. Thornton took a step forward and Thomas moved to block him completely. That is far enough. For a moment, the two men faced each other, tension crackling in the air. Thornton was clearly not accustomed to being defied, and Thomas could see him struggling with rage and wounded pride. Finally, Thornton's expression shifted to something calculating. I have men waiting outside, he said softly. 3 of them. Do you really think you can stop me from taking what is mine? She is not yours, Thomas replied. And if you try to take her, you will have to go through me and then through the law. This is New Mexico territory, Mr. Thornton. Whatever power you have in Chicago means nothing here. Power travels, Thornton said. I have money, connections, lawyers. I can make your life very difficult, Cowboy. Then try, Thomas said calmly. But know that the moment you lay a hand on Sarah, I will defend her with everything I have. And I guarantee you out here your fancy lawyers will not help much. Sarah stepped up beside Thomas, taking his hand. Richard, it is over. I do not love you. I do not want to marry you. No amount of threats or money or legal maneuvering will change that. Go back to Chicago. Find someone who actually wants the life you offer. You humiliated me, Thornton hissed. Do you know what people said when you disappeared? How foolish I looked. That is what this is really about, Sarah said with sudden understanding. Not love or even possession, your pride. I wounded your pride by choosing freedom over you. Thornton's face twisted with rage, and for a moment, Thomas thought he might actually attack. But then footsteps sounded behind them, and the minister appeared from a side door, drawn by the raised voices. Is everything all right here? The minister asked, taking in the scene. Thomas seized the opportunity. Reverend Carter, this is Sarah Norton, my fiancée. This man has been harassing her. He followed her from Chicago despite her making it clear she wants nothing to do with him. The minister, a solid man in his 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor, frowned at Thornton. Is this true, sir? This is a private matter, Thornton said tightly. Not in my church it is not, Carter replied. Miss Norton, do you know this man? Yes, Sarah said clearly. He was my fiancé in Chicago, but I ended our engagement because he was violent and controlling. I came west to escape him. I am going to marry Thomas Sullivan of my own free will. Carter nodded slowly. Mr. Thornton, I suggest you leave. We do not take kindly to men who pursue women against their will out here, and we especially do not take kindly to violence against women. You have no idea what you are interfering with, Thornton warned. I know enough, Carter said firmly. Now leave my church. For a moment, Thomas thought Thornton might refuse, but the man was smart enough to recognize when a situation had turned against him. With visible effort, he smoothed his expression back into cold control. This is not over, Sarah, he said quietly. I have invested too much in you to simply walk away. Then that is your mistake, Sarah replied, her voice steady now. Goodbye, Richard. Thornton stared at her for a long moment, then turned on his heel and strode out of the church. Thomas immediately went to the door and watched as Thornton joined 3 rough-looking men waiting by an expensive carriage. They exchanged words, Thornton clearly angry, then climbed into the carriage and drove away into the night. Thomas turned back to find Sarah trembling, all her courage collapsing now that the immediate danger had passed. He pulled her into his arms, feeling her shake against him. "It is all right," he murmured. "He is gone." "He will not stop," Sarah said, her voice muffled against his chest. "You do not know him like I do. He never stops." "Then we will deal with whatever comes," Thomas replied firmly. "Together." Reverend Carter approached them, his expression concerned. "Miss Norton, Mr. Sullivan, I want you to know that I will support you in this. If what you say is true, and I have no reason to doubt it, then you have the church's protection." "Thank you, Reverend," Thomas said gratefully. "Come to my office tomorrow," Carter continued. "Judge Morrison is a friend of mine. I will make sure he understands the situation when you apply for your marriage license. The sooner you two are legally married, the better. It will give you more standing if Thornton tries to use the courts." They thanked him again and returned to the hotel, both shaken by the encounter. Thomas walked Sarah to her room and hesitated at the door, not wanting to leave her alone. "Will you be all right?" he asked. Sarah nodded, though her eyes were still wide with residual fear. "Yes. Thomas, I am so sorry. I never wanted to bring this danger to you." "Stop apologizing," Thomas said gently, cupping her face in his hands. "What happened tonight only makes me more certain. I want to marry you, Sarah. I want to protect you. And I meant what I said to Thornton. He will have to go through me to get to you." She stood on her toes and kissed him softly. "I do not deserve you." "You deserve everything good," Thomas replied. "Now get some rest. We have a marriage license to obtain tomorrow." He stayed in the hallway until he heard her lock the door, then returned to his own room. But sleep did not come easily. Thomas kept replaying the confrontation in his mind, analyzing every word, every gesture. Thornton was dangerous, that much was clear. The man had resources and connections that could make their lives difficult. But Thomas had faced down rustlers, survived droughts and harsh winters, built a successful ranch from hard work and determination. He was not about to let some Eastern dandy intimidate him. The next morning, Thomas and Sarah met with Judge Morrison in his office. Reverend Carter had already spoken to him, and the judge listened carefully as Sarah explained her situation. Morrison was a fair man, known for his no-nonsense approach to frontier justice. "Miss Norton, do you enter into this marriage of your own free will?" Morrison asked directly. "Yes, Your Honor, completely of my own free will." "And Mr. Sullivan, you understand the potential complications this union might bring?" "Yes, sir, I do, and I accept them willingly." Morrison nodded and began preparing the marriage license. "I will make a note in the official record about the circumstances. If Mr. Thornton attempts any legal action, this documentation will help establish that your marriage to Mr. Sullivan was entered into freely and without coercion. However, I must warn you both. Men like Thornton do not give up easily. Be prepared for him to try other methods." "We understand," Thomas said, taking Sarah's hand. The judge completed the paperwork and scheduled their wedding ceremony for the following day. "I want to move quickly on this," Morrison explained. "Once you are legally married, Thornton will have a much harder time claiming any right to Miss Norton." They spent the rest of the day making final preparations. Thomas bought Sarah a simple gold wedding band from the general store, a plain band that she declared was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Sarah purchased fabric for a new dress, something nicer than her usual work clothes to wear at the ceremony. That evening, Thomas treated Sarah to another dinner at the hotel restaurant. They talked about their wedding the next day, about their future together, about the life they would build. Despite the shadow of Thornton's threats, Thomas saw hope and happiness returning to Sarah's eyes. "A year ago, I never imagined I would be here," Sarah said softly over dessert. "I thought my life was over, that I was trapped with no way out. And now I am in New Mexico territory, about to marry a good man who actually loves me. It feels like a dream." "It is real," Thomas assured her. "And it is only the beginning." The next day dawned clear and cold, the December sun bright in a cloudless sky. Thomas dressed in his best clothes, wishing he had something fancier for such an important occasion. But when he met Sarah at the church, she assured him he looked perfect. She wore a simple blue dress she had altered overnight, her dark hair loose around her shoulders for the first time since he had known her. She looked beautiful and happy and nervous all at once. Reverend Carter performed the ceremony with Judge Morrison serving as witness, along with Pete Martinez and his wife Maria, who Thomas had asked to attend. The words were traditional, but when Thomas spoke his vows, he meant every syllable. "I, Thomas Sullivan, take you, Sarah Norton, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you in good times and bad, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health, as long as we both shall live." Sarah's voice trembled slightly but remained steady as she repeated her own vows. When Thomas slipped the gold band onto her finger, tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of joy. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Carter said with a warm smile. "Thomas, you may kiss your bride." Thomas cupped Sarah's face gently and kissed her, sealing their union. When they broke apart, both were smiling and the small gathering applauded. Sarah was no longer Sarah Norton, running and afraid. She was Sarah Sullivan, wife of a rancher, with legal standing and protection she had not had before. They celebrated with a small meal at the hotel, Maria having baked a cake for the occasion. Pete regaled them with stories about ranch life, making Sarah laugh until her sides hurt. For a few hours, the threat of Thornton faded into the background, replaced by the simple joy of being newly married and surrounded by friends. But reality returned when they prepared to leave Hot Springs the next morning. Thomas loaded their belongings into the wagon, very aware that they were now more exposed, that Thornton could be watching, waiting for an opportunity. He kept his rifle close and his eyes on their surroundings as they made the hour-long journey back to the ranch. Sarah noticed his vigilance. "Do you think he will try something?" "I do not know," Thomas admitted, "but I am not taking chances." They arrived home without incident, and Thomas felt some of the tension ease as they pulled up to the familiar adobe house. This was his territory, land he knew intimately. If Thornton wanted trouble, Thomas would have the advantage here. That night, their first night as husband and wife, Thomas stood in the doorway of what had been Sarah's room, watching her gather her belongings to move them to his larger bedroom. "Their bedroom now. Are you all right?" he asked softly. Sarah turned to him, a dress draped over her arm, and smiled. "I am more than all right. I am happy, truly happy." "So am I," Thomas said, moving into the room. "Sarah, I want you to know we can take this slowly, tonight, tomorrow, whenever you are ready. I will never push you or demand anything. We have the rest of our lives." She set down the dress and came to him, placing her hands on his chest. "I know. That is why I love you. You see me as a person, not a possession." She reached up and kissed him softly. "I am your wife, Thomas. And I want to be your wife in every way." Their wedding night was tender and unhurried, a stark contrast to the fear and force Sarah had experienced with Thornton. Thomas was patient and gentle, letting Sarah set the pace, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Sarah cried tears of relief and joy. "I did not know it could be like this," she whispered. "Based on Richard's behavior, I thought marriage would be something to endure, not something to enjoy." It should always be like this, Thomas replied, stroking her hair. Based on mutual love and respect, the weeks that followed were the happiest either of them could remember. They settled into married life naturally, their earlier routines adapting seamlessly to their new relationship. Sarah still cooked and maintained the house, but now it was as Thomas's wife and partner rather than his employee. They made decisions together about the ranch, planned improvements for spring, talked about the future. Winter deepened, and the ranch became isolated as snow piled up in the surrounding mountains. Thomas did not mind the isolation this year. Being snowed in meant Thornton could not reach them easily, and it gave him and Sarah time to simply be together, to strengthen the bonds of their new marriage. January passed peacefully, then February. Thomas began to hope that Thornton had given up, that perhaps their marriage had convinced him to return to Chicago and find someone else to terrorize. Sarah seemed to relax more each day, the haunted look gradually fading from her eyes. In early March, when the snow began to melt and spring seemed possible again, Thomas had to go into town for supplies. Sarah insisted on coming with him, saying she was tired of being cooped up and wanted to see other people. Thomas hesitated but agreed. They had been married for over 2 months now, and there had been no sign of Thornton. Perhaps the danger really had passed. Hot Springs was busy when they arrived, other ranchers also emerging from winter isolation to stock up on supplies. Thomas and Sarah worked through their list at the general store, chatting with neighbors they had not seen in months. Several women congratulated Sarah on her marriage, making her blush with pleasure at being accepted into the community. They were loading the wagon when Pete Martinez approached, his expression troubled. "Thomas, could I speak with you a moment, private-like?" Thomas glanced at Sarah, who nodded and continued securing the supplies. He followed Pete a short distance away. "What is wrong?" "Maybe nothing," Pete said quietly. "But there are 2 men at the saloon who have been asking questions. They claim to be looking for work, but something about them does not sit right. They asked about you specifically, about your wife, about the ranch." Thomas felt ice forming in his gut. "What do they look like?" "Rough characters. One is tall and thin with a scar on his cheek. The other is shorter, built thick, looks like he knows how to use his fists. They are carrying nice guns, though, nothing a drifter could afford." "Thornton's men," Thomas said grimly. "Has to be." "You want me to come back to the ranch with you?" Pete offered. "I can bring my brother too. We can watch the place for a while." Thomas considered the offer. Part of him wanted to accept, to have backup against whatever Thornton was planning. But another part of him knew that ultimately this was his fight. He could not ask others to risk themselves indefinitely. "Not yet," Thomas said finally. "But thank you, Pete. Keep your ears open in town. Let me know if you hear anything else." Pete nodded and clasped Thomas's shoulder. "You are a good man, amigo. You and your wife do not deserve this trouble." Thomas returned to the wagon where Sarah waited. One look at his face told her something was wrong. "What is it?" "I will explain on the road," Thomas said quietly, helping her up onto the bench. "We need to leave now." Once they were out of town, Thomas told her what Pete had reported. Sarah's face went pale, but she did not cry or panic. Instead, she lifted her chin with determination. "We have to be smart about this," she said. "If those men report back to Richard that they have found me, he will come himself or send more men. Either way, we need to be prepared." "I have been thinking about that," Thomas said. "I hate to say it, but maybe you should go stay with Pete's family in town for a while. They would look after you, keep you safe." "Absolutely not," Sarah said firmly. "I am not leaving you to face this alone. We are married, Thomas. Whatever happens, we face it together." "Sarah, these men are dangerous." "So are you," she replied, surprising him. "You think I have not noticed the way you handle yourself?" The confidence you have. You may be a rancher now, but you were something else before, were you not? Thomas was quiet for a moment. Sarah had touched on something he rarely talked about. I spent some years as a lawman before I took over the ranch. Town marshal in a couple of rough places. I know how to handle trouble. Then we handle this together, Sarah said. I am not some delicate flower who needs to be hidden away. I am stronger than I used to be. You have given me that strength. Thomas wanted to argue, but he saw the resolution in her eyes and knew it would be pointless. Besides, part of him was proud of her courage, even as he worried about her safety. When they reached the ranch, Thomas immediately began making preparations. He checked his rifle and pistols, made sure ammunition was readily available, positioned weapons at strategic points around the house. He explained to Sarah where everything was, how to load and fire the guns if necessary. If shooting starts, you get down and stay down, he instructed. And if I tell you to run, you run. Do not argue, do not hesitate. Get on a horse and ride to Pete's place as fast as you can. Promise me. I promise, Sarah said, though Thomas suspected she was lying. They spent the next 2 days in tense anticipation, waiting for something to happen. Thomas worked close to the house, keeping Sarah in sight at all times. At night he slept lightly, waking at every sound. Sarah tried to maintain their normal routine, but the strain showed on both of them. On the third evening, just as the sun was setting, a rider approached the ranch. Thomas recognized him immediately as one of the men Pete had described, the tall one with the scar. The man stopped well short of the house and raised his hands to show he was not holding a weapon. I come to talk, he called out. No trouble, just talk. Thomas stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. Then talk, but do not come any closer. The man remained on his horse. My employer wants to make you an offer. He is willing to pay you $5,000 if you agree to have your marriage annulled. The lady returns with us, you keep the money, everyone walks away happy. Not interested, Thomas said flatly. Now leave my property. That is a lot of money, mister, the scarred man said. More than a rancher like you probably makes in 2 years. Take it. Let the lady go. She is not worth dying over. My wife is worth more than all the money in the world, Thomas replied. And if you are threatening me, you should know I was a lawman for 6 years before I took up ranching. I have faced down worse than you. The scarred man's expression hardened. You are making a mistake. My employer does not give up. He will get what he wants one way or another. Then he can try, Thomas said, but he will have to go through me to do it, and I do not go down easy. For a long moment the two men stared at each other. Then the scarred man nodded slowly. All right then, you have been warned. What happens next is on you. He turned his horse and rode away into the gathering darkness. Thomas watched until he was out of sight, then returned inside where Sarah waited, pale but composed. They will come back, she said quietly. Richard will not accept no for an answer. I know, Thomas replied. We need help. He spent the next hour writing messages. One went to Pete Martinez, asking him to gather some trusted men and be ready to come to the ranch on short notice. Another went to Judge Morrison, explaining the situation and requesting any legal assistance possible. A third went to the territorial marshal's office in Santa Fe, formally requesting protection against intimidation and potential violence. At first light, Thomas rode into town and sent the messages, then stopped at the church to speak with Reverend Carter. The minister listened to his concerns and immediately offered support. I will speak to the town council, Carter said. Hot Springs may be small, but we look after our own. If these men try anything in town, they will find themselves dealing with more than they bargained for. Thomas returned to the ranch feeling slightly better. They were not alone in this fight. The community was rallying around them. But he knew that ultimately, Thornton's men would likely attack at the ranch, where they were isolated and vulnerable. That night, Pete arrived with his brother Juan and 2 other men from nearby ranches, all armed and ready to help. Thomas tried to protest that he did not want to put them in danger, but Pete waved him off. "You would do the same for any of us," Pete said simply. "Besides, Maria would have my hide if I let anything happen to you and your wife." They set up a watch schedule, with 2 men always on guard while the others rested. Sarah kept them fed and provided coffee throughout the long night. Nothing happened, but the tension was exhausting. The next day brought a response from Judge Morrison. He had contacted the territorial marshal and alerted him to the situation. A deputy would be dispatched within the week. Morrison also sent a formal legal opinion stating that Thornton had no legal claim on Sarah, and that any attempt to forcibly take her would constitute kidnapping, a serious crime in New Mexico territory. It was something, but Thomas knew it might not be enough. Thornton could afford to pay men who did not care about territorial laws. On the 4th night after the scarred man's visit, the attack came. Thomas was on watch with Juan, the 2 of them positioned at opposite ends of the house, when movement caught his eye near the barn. He gave a low whistle to alert Juan, then watched as shapes materialized from the darkness. 5 men, all armed, moving toward the house in a coordinated assault. "Inside!" Thomas shouted, firing a warning shot into the air. "Everyone inside now!" Gunfire erupted immediately. Thomas dove behind a water trough as bullets thudded into the wood above his head. He could hear the men inside returning fire from windows, could see muzzle flashes from both sides. The air filled with smoke and noise and chaos. Thomas aimed carefully and fired, seeing one of the attackers stumble and fall. Another shot came from the house, dropping a second man, but there were still 3 left, and they were using the darkness and outbuildings for cover, making it hard to get a clear shot. A bullet splintered the wood next to Thomas's head, sending splinters flying. He rolled to a new position and fired again, forcing one of the attackers to retreat behind the barn. From inside the house, Pete and the others kept up a steady barrage, preventing the attackers from advancing. The standoff continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then, suddenly, Thomas heard hoofbeats approaching from the direction of town. More riders, at least 6 or 7 of them, riding hard. For a moment, Thomas feared it was reinforcements for Thornton's men. But then he heard Reverend Carter's voice shouting, "This is the Hot Springs militia. Drop your weapons and surrender." The remaining attackers hesitated, caught between the house and the approaching townsmen. One of them raised his rifle toward the newcomers, and Thomas took the opportunity to drop him with a well-placed shot. The other 2 threw down their weapons and put their hands up, clearly deciding that fighting a dozen armed townsmen was not worth whatever Thornton was paying them. Thomas emerged from cover carefully, rifle still at the ready, as the townsmen surrounded the surrendering attackers. Pete and the others came out of the house, and Thomas's heart leaped when he saw Sarah among them, pale but unharmed. Reverend Carter dismounted and surveyed the scene. "Anyone hurt?" "Just the attackers," Pete reported. 3 down, 2 surrendered. One of the townsmen knelt by the fallen attackers, checking for signs of life. "This one is dead. This one too. 3rd one is wounded but alive." The wounded man was the scarred one who had delivered Thornton's offer. Thomas approached him while someone fetched bandages. "Who sent you?" "Go to hell," the man gasped. "You are dying," Thomas said bluntly. "At least tell the truth before you go." "Did Richard Thornton hire you to attack my home and take my wife?" The scarred man coughed, blood appearing on his lips. "Yeah, Chicago Railroad man. Paid good money too. Said we could have the woman after he was done with her." Rage flashed through Thomas, but he kept his voice level. "And you thought that was acceptable? Money is money," the man said with a shrug that turned into a grimace of pain. Reverend Carter had been writing down everything the man said. "This is a confession to attempted kidnapping and assault. Judge Morrison will want to hear this." The wounded man was loaded into a wagon and taken to town along with the two who had surrendered. Townsmen stayed behind to help clean up and bury the dead. As dawn broke over the ranch, Thomas finally allowed himself to relax slightly. Sarah came to him where he stood on the porch watching the sunrise. She slipped her hand into his and he pulled her close, needing to feel her solid and safe against him. "It is over," she whispered. "Isn't it? Richard cannot send anyone else." "Not now that they have all confessed in front of witnesses." "I hope so," Thomas replied, "but we need to make sure." Over the next few days, things moved quickly. The territorial marshal arrived and took statements from everyone involved. The two surviving attackers, facing charges that could lead to hanging, were very willing to testify about who had hired them and for what purpose. Formal charges were filed against Richard Thornton for conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Judge Morrison sent word to Chicago authorities, and a week later, Thomas and Sarah received a telegram. Thornton had been arrested. Faced with overwhelming evidence and multiple witnesses, he had been forced to answer for his crimes. Even his money and connections could not save him from the testimony of men he had hired to commit violent felonies. The legal proceedings would take months, Morrison explained, but with the evidence they had gathered and the statements from the hired men, conviction was almost certain. Thornton would likely spend years in prison. And even after his release, any attempt to contact or harass Sarah would violate the terms of a restraining order that Morrison had already filed. When Sarah received the news, she collapsed into a chair and cried for an hour straight, releasing months of fear and tension. Thomas held her through it all, understanding that these were tears of relief, of finally being free. "It is really over," she kept saying. "He cannot hurt me anymore. He cannot control me. I am actually free." "You are free," Thomas confirmed, "and you are safe, here with me for as long as we both shall live." Spring arrived fully, bringing warm days and the renewal of life on the ranch. Thomas and Sarah settled into a peaceful routine, the shadow of Thornton finally lifted from their lives. The ranch flourished under their joint care. Sarah's organizational skills and Thomas's hard work combined to make the operation more efficient and profitable than it had been in years. In May, Sarah came to Thomas with news that made his heart soar. "I am with child," she said, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." Thomas swept her into his arms, joy overwhelming him. "When?" "The doctor thinks early November," Sarah replied, smiling through happy tears. "I know the timing is not perfect with winter coming, but the timing is perfect," Thomas interrupted. "Everything about this is perfect. You are perfect." They spent the warm months preparing for the baby's arrival. Thomas built a cradle from juniper wood, carving designs into the sides during quiet evenings. Sarah sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her face glowing with contentment as she worked. Pete's wife, Maria, who had 5 children of her own, gave Sarah advice and support, helping her navigate the uncertainty of first pregnancy. As Sarah's belly grew round with their child, Thomas found himself falling even more deeply in love with her. She was beautiful pregnant, radiant with happiness. The woman who had arrived on his doorstep less than a year ago, terrified and running, had been replaced by someone confident and secure in her place in the world. "I want to name him after your father," Sarah said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "If it is a boy, what was his name?" "James," Thomas replied. James Robert Sullivan. But what makes you so sure it is a boy? Sarah smiled mysteriously. Just a feeling. Her feeling proved correct. On a cold November night with Maria and the doctor from Hot Springs in attendance, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Thomas paced outside the bedroom for hours, listening to Sarah's labored breathing and occasional cries, feeling helpless and terrified. When the baby's first wail finally split the night, Thomas thought his heart might burst. Maria emerged, smiling widely. "You have a son, Thomas, and your wife did beautifully." Thomas entered the bedroom to find Sarah propped up against pillows, exhausted but triumphant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Thomas, meet James Sullivan, your son." Thomas sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby. James had a shock of dark hair and Sarah's green eyes already open and studying the world with infant curiosity. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. "He is beautiful," Thomas whispered, afraid his voice might break. "You are amazing. Look what you did." "What we did," Sarah corrected softly. "We made this miracle together. The first months of parenthood were exhausting but wonderful. James was a good baby, healthy and content." Thomas discovered he loved fatherhood, loved the weight of his son in his arms, the trust in those infant eyes. He would sit for hours just watching James sleep, marveling that something so perfect had come from his union with Sarah. Winter passed in a blur of feedings and diaper changes and sleepless nights. But even exhausted, Thomas and Sarah were happy. They worked as a team, supporting each other through the challenges of new parenthood. When spring arrived again, James was already trying to crawl and Sarah announced she was pregnant again. "That fast?" Thomas asked, surprised but delighted. "Apparently we are very good at making babies," Sarah replied with a laugh. "I hope you do not mind. I am thrilled." Our family is growing. Their second child, a daughter they named Emma after Thomas's mother, arrived the following December. She had Thomas's brown hair and a disposition that was calm and watchful. With 2 children now, the house felt truly alive, filled with noise and activity and love. Years passed peacefully. James grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved helping his father with ranch work. Emma was quieter, more thoughtful, with a natural gift for animals that delighted Thomas. Sarah bloomed in motherhood, her earlier fears and trauma fading into distant memory. Thomas expanded the ranch gradually, hiring Pete's sons to help with the growing herd. In 1883, 5 years after Sarah had first arrived in Hot Springs, they received word that Richard Thornton had died in prison. A fight with another inmate had turned deadly. Sarah read the telegram without expression, then folded it carefully and placed it in the stove. "I feel nothing," she said to Thomas. "No joy that he is dead, no sadness, just relief that I never have to think about him again." "Then do not think about him," Thomas replied, pulling her close. "He was part of your past. This is your present and your future, here with me and the children." That summer, they added a 3rd child to their family, another boy they named Peter after their faithful friend. The house Thomas had once lived in alone now rang with laughter and children's voices. The land prospered. The community embraced them fully, Sarah becoming known as one of the most capable women in the area, always ready to help a neighbor in need. On their 7th anniversary, Thomas and Sarah stood on the porch as the sun set, watching their children play in the yard. James was 9 now, tall for his age and responsible. Emma was 5, already showing signs of becoming a beauty like her mother. Peter toddled around on chubby legs, getting into everything. "I have been thinking," Sarah said, leaning against Thomas's shoulder, "about how different my life is now compared to 7 years ago. When I got off that stagecoach in Hot Springs, I thought I was just running away. I did not know I was running toward something. Toward you, toward home, toward the family I always wanted but never thought I would have." "I have been thinking similar thoughts," Thomas admitted. "This house was so empty before you came. I was just going through the motions, working the ranch because it was what I knew how to do. You brought life back. You brought love back. You gave me a reason to build something lasting." "We built it together," Sarah corrected, the way she always did. "Everything we have we made as partners." Thomas kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you, Sarah Sullivan. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "I love you too," Sarah replied. "Thank you for giving me a home. Thank you for giving me freedom. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like." James called out from the yard, asking if they could stay outside longer. Thomas laughed and called back that they had 15 more minutes before bath time. Emma was helping Peter stack rocks, her patience with her little brother endless. "They are good children," Sarah observed. "Happy and healthy and loved, everything I hoped for." "We have done well," Thomas agreed. "And we are not done yet. Who knows what the future holds?" As it turned out, the future held more children, a total of 5 eventually. It held continued prosperity as the ranch grew and thrived. It held a lifetime of small moments and large triumphs, of challenges faced together and overcome, of a love that deepened with each passing year. Thomas and Sarah grew old together on that ranch outside Hot Springs. They watched their children grow up, marry, and have children of their own. The house expanded to accommodate the growing family that gathered there for holidays and celebrations. The community that had protected them in their darkest hour remained strong, Hot Springs growing from a small frontier town into a proper settlement. In the evenings, long after the children were grown and gone to establish their own lives, Thomas and Sarah would sit on that same porch and watch the sun set over land they had worked together for decades. Sometimes they talked about the old days, about how they met, about the danger they had faced. But mostly they simply enjoyed being together, comfortable in the deep understanding that comes from sharing a lifetime. Sarah never regretted the choice she made to run, to risk everything for freedom. And Thomas never regretted opening his door to a frightened woman with haunted eyes. From that unlikely beginning had grown something beautiful and lasting, a love story that proved courage and kindness could triumph over cruelty and control. When Thomas was 72 and Sarah was 65, they celebrated their 41st wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The house burst with family, with love, with the legacy they had built together. That night, after everyone had left, Sarah found Thomas standing in the doorway of what had been her first bedroom, the small room with the faded curtains where she had hidden all those years ago. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, slipping her hand into his the way she had thousands of times before. "About the day you arrived," Thomas replied. "How scared you looked, how brave you actually were, how lucky I was that you answered my advertisement." "I was the lucky one," Sarah said. "You saved my life in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Thomas corrected, using her own logic against her with a smile. "And we built something beautiful." They stood together in that doorway, two people who had found each other against all odds and created a love that lasted. Outside, the New Mexico night was clear and vast, stars scattered across an endless sky. The land stretched in all directions, peaceful and prosperous. And in that house, in that moment, Thomas and Sarah Sullivan knew they had found everything they had ever searched for. They had found home. They had found love. They had found each other, and nothing in the world could ever take that away.